Heavenly Stories.
Have you ever wondered why envy can destroy even the closest of relationships? Why two people who share the same blood, the same family, the same childhood, can suddenly find themselves standing on opposite sides of fate? This is not just another story. This is the first tragedy of humanity after Eden, the heartbreaking tale of Cain and Abel. The world was still young when Adam and Eve had two sons. Cain, the firstborn, carried the weight of responsibility. He worked the soil, plowing the earth, sweating under the sun, coaxing food from the ground that had been cursed after his parents' fall. His hands were rough, his back bent, and his pride came from the harvests he pulled out of the stubborn earth. Abel, the younger brother, was different. His world was the fields and the flocks. He watched over sheep and goats, guiding them to green pastures, protecting them from danger. He lived with a gentler rhythm, walking under the stars, listening to the quiet whispers of the night while his animals rested near him. Both brothers knew about God. They had heard their parents' stories of Eden, of the garden they had lost, of the voice of the Creator walking with them in the cool of the day. Deep inside, they longed for that closeness again. Both desired to honor God, but their hearts, their intentions, were not the same. One day, the time came for each of them to bring an offering before the Lord. Cain gathered what he had, fruits, grains, and crops from his fields. He piled them high, hoping the sheer amount would please God. Abel, on the other hand, looked at his flock and chose carefully. He took the firstborn lambs, the best, the purest, and laid them upon the altar. The fire of heaven fell, consuming Abel's sacrifice, a sign of divine acceptance. But Cain's offering stood untouched. The smoke from his crops rose into the air, but no fire came. God had seen Abel's heart, humble, sincere, and trusting. Cain's heart, however, was filled with pride. He gave, but not with love. He sacrificed, but not with faith. Cain's face burned red. His fists tightened. Envy wrapped around him like a snake. Why Abel? Why not me? Why would God favor him over me? It was here that the seeds of bitterness began to grow, seeds that would lead to the first blood spilled by human hands. And this, my friends, is where the story takes its first sharp turn. What happens when jealousy goes unchecked? What happens when pride blinds a man's heart? Stay with me, because the next chapter will show just how dangerous envy can be when it is left to grow. Have you ever felt that sting, that sharp, burning feeling when someone else is praised, and you are overlooked? That moment when your effort seems invisible, and theirs shines like gold. That's the shadow of envy, and for Cain, it began to take over his entire soul. After the offerings, Cain walked away from the altar with his head down. His pride had been wounded, but instead of looking within, he looked at his brother. Abel's sacrifice still smoldered, the sweet smoke rising like a song toward heaven. Cain's own altar, however, lay cold and silent. Why him? Cain muttered under his breath. What makes him better than me? Day after day, those thoughts poisoned him. He no longer saw his brother as family but as competition. Every laugh Abel made, every word he spoke, grated against Cain's pride. The fields that once brought him satisfaction now felt heavy, and his harvests seemed dull compared to Abel's pure lambs. God, in his mercy, did not remain silent. He saw the storm brewing inside Cain's heart. One evening, as Cain brooded in the fields, the Lord spoke to him. Cain, why are you so angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. These words were not condemnation, they were a warning, a lifeline. God was giving Cain the chance to stop, to change, to resist the jealousy that threatened to consume him. But envy is a dangerous thing. It doesn't just whisper, it demands. It claws, it strangles, it blinds. Cain's heart hardened. Instead of softening at God's words, he clenched his fists tighter. He could not bear the thought of living in Abel's shadow. The bitterness grew until it was unbearable. One day, Cain approached Abel with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Brother," he said calmly, "come with me to the field. Let's walk together." Abel, innocent and trusting, agreed. He had no reason to suspect his brother's heart had turned dark. He followed Cain into the open field, the sun high above them, the ground firm beneath their feet. But as they walked further away from home, Cain's steps grew heavier, his breathing sharper. The voice of envy screamed louder in his head, "He took what should have been yours. He stole your place. Remove him, and you will rise." This was the moment of decision. Cain stood on the edge of history, about to choose between mercy and murder, between love and hate. The warning of God still echoed in his mind, but so did the fire of his envy. And this is where everything changes. What will Cain do in that lonely field with only his brother by his side? Stay with me, because the choice he makes will mark the world forever. Have you ever wondered how quickly jealousy can turn into something darker, something irreversible? One moment it is just a feeling, a whisper in the heart, and the next, it becomes an action that cannot be undone. That is exactly what happened in the field that day with Cain and Abel. The sun was hot, and the air hung heavy. Abel walked peacefully, his staff in hand, unaware of the storm raging inside his brother. He spoke of his flocks, of the lambs born that spring, of the beauty of God's creation. But Cain barely heard him. His mind was clouded with anger. Cain's steps slowed. His jaw clenched. His fists curled at his sides. The warning God had given him, "Sin is crouching at your door," now pounded in his mind, but he pushed it away. His envy screamed louder than truth, louder than love, louder than the voice of God himself. Suddenly, Cain turned on Abel. With a force driven not by reason but by rage, he struck his brother down. Abel cried out, his voice echoing across the empty field. But there was no one there to help. No one but Cain, and Cain had become his enemy. The first blood spilled on earth did not come from an animal sacrifice, but from a brother's hand against his own flesh and blood. Abel's body fell to the ground, the dust rising around him, mixing with his blood. His eyes, once full of life, grew still. Cain stood over him, panting, trembling at what he had done. His hands were stained, his heart pounding with both triumph and terror. For a moment, there was silence, a silence so deep that even the earth seemed to hold its breath. But silence did not last. God saw. God always sees. "Cain," the voice of the Lord called, deep and unshakable, "where is your brother Abel?" Cain swallowed hard, fear clawing at his throat. Yet pride still burned within him. He answered with cold defiance, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But God's gaze pierced through the lie. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain's world collapsed. The very earth, the soil he had worked with his hands, had become a witness against him. Abel's blood soaked into the ground, and the ground cried out for justice. For the first time, Cain understood the true weight of sin. Envy had promised him relief, victory, recognition, but instead, it had given him shame, guilt, and a curse he could not escape. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. What judgment will God pronounce on Cain? What happens to the man who kills his own brother? Stay with me, because the next chapter reveals not just the punishment, but also a shocking glimpse of mercy. Have you ever noticed how guilt doesn't stay hidden? It grows heavier with every breath, every thought, until it feels like the whole world is staring straight into your soul. That's exactly how Cain felt as he stood before the Almighty after killing his brother. The Lord's voice cut through the silence. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the very earth which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Cain's heart pounded as God's words continued. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. The sentence was clear: Cain, the farmer, the man of the soil, would never again find peace in the land he once worked. His fields would no longer answer to his sweat. His home, his stability, his very purpose, gone. Cain's face twisted in fear. The same man who had shown no mercy to his brother now begged for it. My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you drive me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me. The words spilled from his lips, not in repentance, but in desperation. Cain was not broken over Abel's death. He was broken over his own fate. His fear was not of sin but of its consequences. Yet here comes one of the most surprising moments in the entire story. Instead of letting Cain face the full weight of human vengeance, God showed mercy even to a murderer. Not so, the Lord replied. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And then, God did something extraordinary. He placed a mark on Cain, a mysterious sign, one that would protect him from being killed by others. Cain, though guilty, would not be destroyed. He would live, but as a wanderer, carrying the heavy burden of his choices. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence. He left behind his home, his family, the land he knew. He settled in the land of Nod, a place that meant wandering. The man who once worked the soil now walked the earth with no roots, no rest, no peace. This was more than just a punishment. It was a picture. A picture of what happens when sin is not resisted, when envy is allowed to take root, when pride hardens the heart. Cain lost not only his brother, but his closeness with God, his identity, his purpose. And yet, in the mark of Cain, we also see a glimpse of God's mercy. Even in judgment, God did not abandon humanity. He showed that his justice is always tempered with grace. But here's the question that lingers: if God could show mercy to Cain, what does that mean for us, people who also struggle with envy, anger, pride? Can we learn from Cain's mistake before envy grows into something darker? Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll see how this story becomes more than just history. It becomes a warning, a mirror, and a call for every heart today. Have you ever realized that the story of Cain and Abel is not just about two brothers long ago, but about you, about me, about every one of us? This ancient tragedy still speaks today, because envy, pride, and the struggle for recognition are battles every human heart faces. Cain and Abel both brought offerings. Outwardly, they both performed an act of worship. But God was not looking only at the gift, he was looking at the heart. Abel gave his best, with faith and humility. Cain gave something, but without sincerity, without love, without trust. And that's the lesson: God doesn't just see what we do. He sees why we do it. He looks past the appearance, the performance, the ritual, and he examines the motives. That's why Abel's sacrifice was accepted, and Cain's was not. But Cain's story warns us of something even deeper. Instead of correcting his heart, instead of humbling himself, he let envy grow. He compared himself to his brother instead of listening to God. And when comparison takes root, it always leads to destruction. Think about it: how often do we look at someone else's success and feel resentment instead of joy? How often do we measure our worth against another person's life? That's Cain's path, and it is still alive in our world today. But Abel shows us another way. His life was short, but his example still speaks. The New Testament tells us that, by faith Abel offered a better sacrifice than Cain. Abel's heart of faith outlived him. Even though his blood cried from the ground for justice, his example still cries out for us to choose faith over pride, sincerity over pretense, humility over envy. Cain's punishment also teaches us something sobering. Sin promises satisfaction, but it delivers emptiness. Cain thought removing Abel would give him peace, but instead it gave him guilt, wandering, and isolation. That is always the way of envy and pride: they never give what they promise. And yet, even in Cain's story, we glimpse the mercy of God. Though Cain deserved death, God marked him for protection. Why? To remind us that God's justice is real, but His mercy is never far away. Even in judgment, He gives space for repentance, for reflection, for change. So what does this mean for us today? It means we must guard our hearts. We must bring God not just outward gifts, not just empty rituals, but the best of ourselves, our sincerity, our love, our faith. We must silence envy before it takes root, and choose gratitude instead of comparison. Because here's the truth, envy destroys, but faith restores. Pride blinds, but humility opens the way to God. Cain's path leads to wandering, but Abel's path leads to eternal remembrance. And now comes the biggest question of all, which path are we choosing? The way of Cain, or the way of Abel? Stay with me, because in the final chapter, we'll bring all of this together and see how this ancient story points us forward to hope, redemption, and the way back to God's heart. Have you ever noticed that the most powerful stories are the ones that leave us with a choice? The story of Cain and Abel is not just history. It is a mirror held up to every single heart. Because in each of us, there is a Cain, and there is an Abel. Cain represents envy, pride, anger, and the refusal to change. Abel represents faith, humility, sincerity, and trust in God. And every day, with every decision, we choose which path we will follow. The tragedy of Cain is that he had a chance to turn back. God warned him, "Sin is crouching at your door, but you must rule over it." He was not doomed to fail. He was not forced into jealousy. He could have humbled himself, corrected his heart, and offered God his best with sincerity. But he chose otherwise. That same warning comes to us today. Sin still crouches at the door. Envy still whispers. Pride still tempts. But God's voice also still speaks, "If you do what is right, will you not be accepted?" Abel's legacy, though short, shows us the power of a sincere heart. His life reminds us that God sees the hidden motives, the secret intentions. He is not impressed with empty rituals, but he treasures honest faith. Abel's sacrifice was not about the lamb, it was about his trust in God. And Cain's mark, strange as it may sound, also speaks today. It reminds us that even in our failures, God does not abandon us. His justice is real, but so is His mercy. He gives space for us to turn back, to repent, to start again. So here's the question for you, right now: what are you offering to God? Is it just something outward, something for appearance, something half-hearted? Or is it the best of your heart, the first of your love, the fullness of your faith? Because here's the truth, God is not after your things. He is after you. He wants your heart. And when your heart is sincere, your life becomes the kind of offering that pleases Him. Cain and Abel's story is not just about the past. It is a warning, but it is also an invitation. An invitation to lay down envy, to silence pride, and to choose the path of sincerity. An invitation to bring not just gifts, but ourselves, wholly, honestly, faithfully, before God. And maybe that's the real power of this story. It's not simply that Abel was accepted and Cain was rejected. It's that you and I still have the choice today. So which voice will you listen to? The whisper of envy, or the call of God? Which path will you follow? The way of Cain, or the way of Abel? The choice is yours, and the time is now. Have you ever thought about why this story is still told thousands of years later? It's because it speaks to the deepest struggles of the human heart, struggles that never grow old. Envy, pride, anger, the desire for approval, these are battles that belong to every generation. Cain and Abel may seem like just two brothers in a distant past, but in truth, they are reflections of us. Cain shows us what happens when we let envy fester, when we ignore God's warning, when we choose pride instead of humility. Abel shows us the beauty of a heart that trusts, that gives sincerely, that offers not just things but faith. And here's the challenge this story leaves us with: which legacy will you leave behind? Will your life echo like Abel's, a testimony of faith that still speaks even after death? Or will it mirror Cain's, a warning of wasted chances and a heart hardened by pride? The choice is not locked in history. It is alive right now. Every time you choose to celebrate someone else's success instead of envying it, you walk the way of Abel. Every time you give to God with honesty instead of pretense, you follow Abel's path. Every time you silence the whisper of pride and listen to the voice of God, you take a step away from Cain and closer to the Creator. So don't let envy write your story. Don't let pride dictate your legacy. Bring your heart, your whole heart, before God. Because He is still looking, still watching, still receiving the offering of those who come to Him with sincerity. Cain's story warns us. Abel's story inspires us. And your story? It is still being written. So here's the question I leave with you: when your life speaks, when your legacy remains, will it cry out like Abel's, a testimony of faith, or will it echo Cain's regret? The choice is yours.